been teaching the pruning class and then the gardening class on the alternate years, and so it's been a lot of fun. I'm part of the Master Gardening Club, and I have had they had a good class on pruning this year that I took. That I learned a few more things, but pruning. We're going to talk about pruning fruit trees and grapes and raspberries, and I can get Sister Weiniger to come up here and write any questions that you have on the board.
You can erase that.
Just erase that.
Go ahead and erase that, and then.
So in case I don't cover the questions that you have, I just want to get those up here just so to make sure we get everybody's questions. If they have specific reasons they came today. Is there anybody have specific questions that they want answered today? Oh, this is a general class, it looks
How you
like.
figure out what we're going to talk about?
Okay, so,
Yeah, I do.
yeah, here you go.
Master Gardening training classes, where are those?
Okay, well, I'll answer that one right now. The Master Gardener training classes are taught up at the Bannock County Extension Office at the fairgrounds, and they teach those from like the 1st of January to the 1st of May. So they're right in the middle of it right now, and it'll conclude the first part of May.
You teach grafting here today too?
I hadn't planned on it, but I can touch on it at the end if you'd like. Put down grafting. And any other thoughts before we get moving along here? Okay, when to prune? What's the best time to prune?
Anything has
Anytime, with the caveat, the best times are late winter and early spring. You can prune anytime you need to. You know, pruning in the fall is a little riskier because sometimes you're forcing new growth that won't get hardened off, and it's a little more likely you can get disease in the fall. So fall's probably the worst time, but still, it's if you got things in the way and you need to get them out of there, you can do it anytime. But it's easier late winter because and early spring, because then oftentimes you can tell if the wood is not dead, so you can prune it out, diseased, and it's before the leaves get on, it's just much easier to see the structure of the tree. So when the leaves get on, it's really difficult, but still, you know, at times it's necessary to prune in the summer, and we'll talk about a little bit about summer pruning later on. There are some things you can do in the summer that are helpful. Okay, equipment. First, we're going to talk about equipment, and you see the ladder. That's a tree ladder. If you're going to be climbing around in trees, tree ladders are nice because they're three-legged, so they're sturdy. It's not like a four-legged ladder that you can't get sturdy on the lawn. And but you know, I still use a little four-legged ladder just for short trees sometimes because this is kind of big. Let's talk about loppers first. This is probably the thing that you use the most, and this is the style that I like best. It has some give there, so it doesn't jar you, and it's a good quality steel, and it's got a pretty good length, and you do most of my pruning with these.
Do you have like a certain brand or something we should know to look for when we buy them?
No, I don't. Just don't buy a cheap one. if they're not $25 or $30 at least, they probably won't last. Here's another set of loppers. And you see this one has gears on it. See those gears there, which give it a lot of oomph. You can cut big limbs, okay? But they're very awkward. You can't get in to get a tree unless you open it wide up, and so they're not very useful except for cutting up branches after you prune.
Firewood, that's firewood.
Yeah, after you prune, you want to cut them up, put in your garbage can. These work really nice. But for pruning on trees, I don't use them very often because they're just not, they're twice as heavy as this one in the first place. And you're welcome to come up and play with these if you'd like later. And this is a lot lighter, and you see how I don't have to open it very far to get in there. Whereas these you have to really open them. You know, little small pruners sometimes are handy, and I don't think.
I had a question about the small ones.
Yeah.
I kind of have arthritis in my hands, so I don't have that much strength. Is there one that's better than the other?
I don't know that there is, other than this one. I'll show you this one. This is an electric one, and this comes off. It's not a pull right now, but this comes off. And if you got arthritis, this can be really handy because all you have to do is, well, I'll show you that. You just have to.
Do they have those at Home Depot or that?
I don't.
What is that called, electric?
It's just an electric pruner. I got this online. This is a Scott, made by Scott, and it's really cheap. I mean, it was only $65 with the pole, and they make them up $300, $200, $300.
Does that extend?
Yeah, this extends.
Okay.
So you can get up there pretty good to prune with this, and it's not as fast. You know, if you're using loppers to prune, it's a lot slower. So I use these for most everything. But if I don't want to get a ladder out, or if I just want to catch some of the higher limbs, this works pretty nice.
I bought some hand shears at the home show that's coming up. That are gear type, like the one you had showed earlier.
Okay.
Man, I like those better than my loppers.
They might.
They're
Yeah.
just a lightweight.
Okay. What do you know? What brand they were?
They have a gear in them?
Yeah, they got a gear in. Go up the home show, it's in a 2 weeks
Spring fair.
spring fair. And
In
then,
Idaho?
no, right here in Pocatello.
In the mini dome, right?
In the mini dome, there's no boy shows up there every year. He has some pounders underneath them.
They're coming out with new ones all the time. So yeah, that's good to know. Yes.
Just as we're listening, does this all apply to bushes too? Like our trees and bushes?
Pretty much the same.
Basically the same.
Only on bushes, you know, you might get by with just some hand pruners.
But like as far as like
Not-
when and how to trim them? It would be.
Oh,
the
yes.
same. Okay.
There's another one in there in a small case, black case that was in the truck.
In the back or?
Yeah, why don't you bring it in, just
In the back or the
back. Okay, the other thing that I do use a lot, depending on the size of the tree, is a pole saw. And these have loppers as well as a saw. So, and this extends. This will go almost like 20 feet. It really gets up there. And I got this one at Costco, and I saw them down there the other day, and they're I think $60.
And that's electric.
No, it's not electric.
You got it.
But that wouldn't be so bad as this.
But then it has a rope. It has a rope, so you can cut off. So it's smaller than it's just pull the rope and cut those off. So especially if you got big trees to work on, tall trees, these are really handy. And I didn't bring my other pole saw, but It's an extension, but it's a chainsaw, yeah, electric chainsaw. And I use that sparingly, but for big shade trees that I can't get up into, I use that quite a bit. But it's not, it doesn't give you a very clean cut, and it's easy to bump something. And so I don't use that unless I have to, but it does come in handy sometimes.
Do you ever use a sawzall?
I use the sawzall to take out tree stumps. Yeah.
You've never pruned a one?
I've never pruned with one, and I suspect that they would work okay. I think they probably would work just fine.
It does.
Yeah,
I mean, it's easier for me
yeah,
on a large branch to use the sawzall than it is to try, that one. 'Cause
sure,
I have this, but the
Sure.
sawzall looks good.
yeah. Well, that's another good thought.
Did you?
Everybody knows what a sawzall is, and they do make a pruning blade, and like I say, I've used them to take out roots, cut roots off, and take out stumps a lot, but I haven't really pruned with them a lot. But that's another good thought. This is just a smaller set. That these are good for bushes and raspberries, that kind of stuff. That they're handy and they fold up and fit in a case. And then a good tree saw. You can use a sawzall, but a tree saw, you can sometimes you get into corners where you can't get other places, and a good tree saw is necessary.
You found a good way to sharpen those, and I just buy a new one.
That's about what I do too. And it's just about as expensive to sharpen as this is buy a new one almost. Although they last for a long time. I mean, I didn't bring it, but my father had one that he's had for years and years, and I had it for 45 years, and that, still works. It's starting to get dull now, but they last a long time if you don't cut wire. Or nails and things like that, yeah. Okay.
That's called a tree saw.
So, another question, so does these saws cut on the down pole or the up?
These saws cut both.
Oh, okay.
These are both
Okay.
directions.
Okay.
Tree saws cut both directions. That's another reason you want a good tree saw.
Just wondering how it cut.
Very good question. Oh, and then sharpen them. Really fairly simple. You just, you just take your file and just, doesn't take a lot. If you've got a nick in it, you can look at it in the sunlight. If you've got a nick somewhere, sometimes you have to file for a while to get that nick out. But you want a really sharp pair of loppers so you get a clean cut every time. And so it's they're fairly easy to sharpen with the hand file. Any other questions? Okay.
Do you use oil at the end of your blend to keep the edge on or not?
I haven't. I haven't. As long as they're not, as long as they're cut clean, I'm good.
Your last thing up there was disinfection.
Oh,
I'm curious about that.
I'm sorry, I didn't
Take
take
some
it
of
out of my
our,
pocket. Just if you're pruning on a tree that's got some disease in it, and you can tell, if it's diseased, it is a good idea to disinfect your saws or your loppers before you go to another tree. And I just fill this with alcohol and just squirt it on and disinfect it. You can use bleach, but I don't like bleach because it does
You
water.
might sprinkle on your clothes too.
It's water and it takes a while. It can rust your equipment if you're not careful. So yeah, I prefer a little alcohol. Okay, I think we covered everything there. Okay, the basics of pruning are, first of all, remove problems. Secondly, establish and maintain tree shape and space wood to allow for adequate light penetration. So you can maybe see from that there's no wrong way to prune a tree. Because you may want your tree to look a lot different than your neighbor.
I've heard it said that you prune apple trees different than you do stone trees. Is
Yes.
that accurate?
We're gonna get to that.
Okay.
Okay, when talking about removing problems, you want to remove diseased, broken, or damaged branches. And you can see right here on this little inset that there's a dead limb right here. You can see how the disease is just traveling right down into the main tree root there. So you want to remove diseased and broken branches. Branches that are crossing or rubbing. You don't want branches rubbing against each other because that also introduces disease. And branches that form a narrow angle from the main scaffold. You want to try to get branches at a 45-degree angle. So if you've got one coming straight up like this, it's not good. Or if it's too flat, it's not good because it's going to break easily. So you want to try to get your branches off the main stem at about 45 degrees. You want to get rid of old branches with long, complex spurs. They should be removed to make room for younger, more productive branches. Why prune? Help the 3 Ds: dead, diseased, and damaged. Get rid of, that's the first thing you do before you do anything else. Just get rid of all of the dead, diseased, and damaged wood, and then you can see what you've got left that you need to work with.
Where is the node on your cardinal rule there?
A node is a bud or a branch. So if you have everywhere you've got a bud on this limb, that's called a node. So, or if you've got a branch coming out, that's a node. Okay. We'll talk about that here more in a minute. Okay, tree shape. Again, 45 degrees coming off the main trunk. Branches that are too upright will remain vegetative. So you get sucker growth, every year on a fruit tree, and they promote vegetative growth but not fruit. So you either want to get rid of them or cut them back to just 2 or 3 nodes so that they form spurs and fruit.
What are spurs?
We'll get to that in just a second. Okay, and cardinal rule number 1 was do not leave a stub. Always prune to a node. Cardinal rule number 2 is the same as rule number 1. Never prune, never leave a stub. That's just the worst thing you can do on a tree is leave a stub.
So you're saying like halfway between those buds is a bad place to cut it?
That's right. So
You cut above or below?
yeah, above or below. So anytime if this is a new tree and you're going to cut it off, you always come back to a branch. So you wouldn't cut it here in between these. You would cut it right here or right here. Cut it 1/8 of an inch above, 1/8 of an inch above, but not in the middle. And the same anywhere else. You cut it right at just above the bud or just or a branch that's coming out. So that's what that's talking about.
If you have a stub that's healed off, is it better to go back and cut it or just leave it?
Unless it has some growth coming out at the end of the stub, you want to take it off.
Okay.
If you
My
got
husband was an interesting pruner.
if you got growth, you're okay. If you got growth at the end of the stub, you're okay. But if it's just a stub,
It's a dead spot.
it will get disease in eventually. Okay, there's a little discussion on auxins, but what it's really trying to tell you is that if you cut, whenever you cut a branch off, these auxins or that are in the tip, the hormones that are in the tip of a branch are the ones that keep it growing. And so when you cut that off, the branch doesn't know quite what to do, and so it forms what we call a witch's broom. In other words, 4 or 5 branches may come out, especially if it's a big branch. I guess the practice is that you always want to cut. I got too far ahead of myself. You always want to cut a branch above the wherever you cut the branch. The next bud is the one that's going to grow and put the most growth into it. So
What do you do if you've already got a lot of witches' brooms?
well,
Well, he looks like he fixed this.
just thin them out, and
But they're going up like that. Are they gonna bear fruit, that middle one?
well, they may eventually, but if you come back and just maybe cut those off, right? See, just cut those off to just 2 or 3 nodes, it will help. So, for example, if I wanted this limb to be to go that direction, I would cut it off right here, and then this limb would be the one that would take the most growth. If I wanted to come out this direction, I cut it off here, and this limb is the one that's gonna make the growth. And the same for a bud. If I want this bud to come out, or the limb to come out from here, I would cut it off right there. Here's an inside. If I cut it off there, the limb's going to go inside, and that's probably not a good idea. So you just cut it off at the direction of the bud that you want, the direction you want to go.
So before you cut, you should think where it's going.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Okay, and again, you always want to cut back at what they call the shoulder of a limb, and if you're wanting to cut this limb that's going out here off, you come back here to the shoulder. If you want to cut one that's going up straight, again you cut it back across the shoulder right here. If you look at a tree, I'll pass this around. You can see every branch has a shoulder. There's just a little the swelling of bark around the edge, and that's the shoulder. And you don't want to cut that shoulder off. You want to cut the limb right at the shoulder. So you leave the shoulder, and then that shoulder just comes around the wound and heals it up, covers it up eventually. So, and it's the same for little trees or little limbs as it is for big limbs. You just want to come back to that shoulder and cut that off. I don't know if these will work or not, but you can just see just cut it off like that, so you leave the shoulder, but as close as you can get to the shoulder. I'll just pass this around and you can look at it and see the shoulder there. I think I can say it.
Would you do the same things on those vertical suckers? Leave that
Yep.
out there.
Yeah, where you cut it off on the bottom, just above the shoulder. And
Are those the witch's broom? All those up tips?
those are all sucker growth. You can see quite a bit of sucker growth coming up in there. Yeah, and so that's before it was pruned, and then that's after it was pruned. So you can see all the growth, that stuff that was shooting up, took all that out, or cut them back to just a short stub. And then thinned it out where it was too thick. That's Golden Delicious.
What's the rule of how much you can thin?
You're not supposed to take more than a third of the growth every year, the total growth. But you can take a lot. I mean, the stuff I was taking out of this is small stuff. So, you know, if you take the whole weight of the tree, it's a very small portion of it, really. You can take a lot out and not hurt the tree.
And you can do it yearly.
You can do it yearly. In fact, yeah. In fact, that tree, that was just what I had pruned it the year before, and that's what it looked like at the end of the year. And then that's the next year. So, you know, it depends too. Sometimes if it's a heavy fruiting year, if you got a lot of fruit on the tree, it's not going to do as much growth on the limbs. There won't be much limb growth. But if you have a year like last year when everything froze, then you're going to get a lot of growth, and you need to come back and take that out again. Branch density, periodically take a step back and see what the tree shape looks like. You should be able to see light penetrate into the tree interior. Conceivably throw a baseball cap through the tree without hitting a branch. That may be a stretch. You should be able to see through the tree when the leaves aren't present. And also look up through the tree as well from the bottom as well as from the side. So look at this tree. This is a red delicious, and you can see it's been let go for a couple years, and it's really thick. See how thick that is? That's what it looked like after I pruned it. So I took a lot of stuff out of it. And the hazard of taking too much out is you're going to get a lot of sucker growth the next year. But still, you need to get it into the shape that you want it so you can.
What do you do after you get a lot of sucker growth the next year?
Take them back out.
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Is that a permanent problem now?
Is that what?
Is that a permanent problem now forevermore?
It's to some extent, yeah. You're always going to have sucker growth, and unless you just, you know, it's a really big tree and you just kind of let it go. But most trees, if you want to keep them contained, you know, short, and you're going to have sucker growth that you'll have to take out every year.
Do you take out the sucker growth like during the summer?
Yes.
Or- okay,
And
so
we'll
you don't wait till the next.
We'll get to that too, but you can take sucker growth out in the summer. In fact, see, my dad had an apple orchard when I grew up, so that was one of our jobs in the spring or early summer. We'd go out and pull suckers off, you know, all day long.
So were you just breaking them off?
Yeah, with our hands. When they're green, when they're young and green, you can just pull them off
And
with
it
your
doesn't pull
hands.
onto the bark and strip it?
Not usually, not if you get them young enough. If you get way too long, they will. Okay, let's talk just a minute about the differences in trees, and because you prune differently for apples and pears as opposed to peaches and apricots and plums and cherries. So apples and pears grow on spurs, and I'll show you some spurs. Peaches and apricots grow on second year wood and to some extent on spurs. And plums and cherries pretty much grow on little small spurs, but they're not as pronounced as they are for apples and pears. So here's a pear, for example. See that little spur? That's called a spur. And apple trees and pears get these little spurs on them, and that's where the fruit comes on. It's right there. You can see this is a cherry. See that little spur, and these are also blossoms. This is a second year wood right there, and those blossoms will be cherry blossoms. They'll be individual, and this one they'll have 4 or 5 cherries right together. Okay, and this is a peach. These trees I got right here are peach. This is a peach tree, so they look the same. Every place that there's a bud right there will be a bloom, because this is all second year grew last year. And apricot, again, you can see that they look a lot like cherries. They have little spurs and they grow on little spurs. So when you're pruning a tree, you need to think about that, because if you want a lot of fruit and you don't have a lot of blossoms, why you don't want to cut off that wood. You want to leave it, some of it, so that it's you have some fruit that year. An apricot, we're going to talk about open and single leader pruning. But again, like most of this growth up in here is all second year or first year growth, and so all these little shoots come out. So those were the apricots will be this year, because they grew.
They're on the first year?
On the second year, yeah, 1-year-old wood. And apricot trees and peach trees, you normally will want to prune those in what we call the open method. In other words, you don't have a central leader going up through the tree. You cut that leader off and allow the tree to just expand out. And that's what this little apricot tree, it doesn't have a central leader in it. This is a peach tree, and you can see it doesn't have an open leader in the center. It's open, and so you force the branches just to go out in every direction, but not up in the middle. And that's typically how you prune a peach tree. And again, peaches form on the second year of growth as well. So you don't want to cut all that stuff off.
As you were marking, how far do you want those that are going even at a 90-degree angle, a horizontal?
Here,
Yeah, how far will you let those go out before they become
about
too
that,
much for the
about
tree?
that far.
Really that far? Because it's clear to the end of the picture?
Yeah.
But it's only about a third of the total rise and out, so you don't want it more than,
It,
what I'm saying,
He's
just sticking out
probably
a third.
pruning,
that may be a little long, but
but it looks like it turns upward, because
Yeah,
you're
it
protecting
does.
your sidewalk, you're not gonna walk in through your
it
hair.
does.
Disturb it.
It does. And but again, you can see I cut these off. These limbs came off that tree. You can see how much I cut off. You know, this is 5 feet. There's 6 feet. This is what I cut off from the top of that.
Wow.
Before you took the picture?
Before I took the picture, yeah. So this was all growing up like that. So I took a lot out of that tree, and
So does you said the second year branches is what the fruit grows on, so the
Yes.
first year branches is what you wanna trim off? Or no?
You gotta let it get to be two.
For next year.
You gotta have it grow up to be two.
Okay,
so this year there's going to be some more growth come out, and that's what we'll have the peaches
Sorry,
next
no
year.
sense what I said, I'm so sorry.
Okay, that'll have the growth next year.
Gotcha.
And to some extent, you get some nodes coming off the older branches that will have peaches on them as well. This is a little Asian pear, and it's a central leader, although it's got one pretty big branch coming off to the side that eventually I'll keep cutting it back as the tree grows, and so it won't become dominant. I'll leave this one to be the dominant.
Is that with all pears?
Not necessarily, but most pear trees, yes.
And do you have to have 2 pairs?
Depends
In the
on
neighborhood?
it depends on the variety.
Okay.
Usually you do.
What is the white on the bottom of the trunk?
Oh, that's just a wrap. It's just a plastic wrap that usually I'll put them on a new tree just to protect it from the sun, and winter, sometimes you get, if you get real cold and then hot sun on it in the winter time, it'll kill the tree. So when it's young, I put those on there. After it gets a little bigger, I just take them
What do you
off.
wrap it up with?
It's just a little plastic. You can buy them at the nursery. They're just a little plastic that just wraps around. Yes.
If you have a Canadian cherry, you wanna do that when you plant it because the squirrels will eat the bark right off the bottom of the tree. As soon as it comes up from the ground, they're just stripping the bark off of it, so
Okay.
keep them wrapped.
And it protects it from mice as well. If you get snow up around that little tree and get mice or voles in there, they'll strip the bark off as well. So this is an apple with a central leader. And typically you want to come up about 18 to 24 inches before you have your first branches come off. And then you come up another 12, 18 inches for another row of branches to come off, and then another foot or so for the final layer maybe.
So you want a central leader on an apple tree?
Yeah, typically you do. Although I'll show you one here in a minute that doesn't have a central leader. And it's a kind of personal preference. You can have it either way. This again is a central leader. You can see it, it's pretty dominant. It's going straight up through there. Now this is an open center. This is before I pruned it, but you can see there's no central leader. They're just spaced around the tree. And after I pruned it, you can still see, it's a little easier to see that there's no central leader in there. It's just 5 or 6 big branches coming off to the side.
That's how ours are.
So, you know, and if it's that way already, you can't change it. You know, that's determined when the tree is young. You determine that the first year or two the tree is planted. After that, you're left with whatever's there, pretty much. Okay, just a tip or two on cutting large branches. If you've got large branches, and if you just come cut it right there when it gets to about this point, it'll break and rip the bark off, and you've got a big ugly wound. So the best way to do that is, first of all, you come make a bottom cut right here for a short distance, and then you cut the limb off right there, and then you come back and cut the stub off right there. Now, you know, if it's not quite this big and you can hold the limb up while you're sawing, well, you can pretty much just make a little bottom cut and then cut it on through. But if
Why
it's
the middle cut? Does that keep it from stripping?
this
Like
one,
number one?
Yeah, not why number one. Not
yeah,
why-
that keeps it from stripping, because it could actually strip all the way back down.
The chainsaw's too aggressive?
Not for those first 2 cuts, but for this one it is. For this one you want a saw cut. But again, you know, you can train a tree any way you want. And this is a trellis system. This is my neighbor, and I prune his every year. And he just has a trellis system.
That's an apple?
That's an apple. These are apple trees.
Well, that has a specific name, I've forgotten it.
Well,
Well,
they call them a fruit wall.
Or a spallier tree.
Yeah. But you can train any tree to do that just about. The only problem with this one is they planted the trees and then somebody put up the fence. Okay, so it doesn't get any sunlight in the afternoon, so it tends to push all the growth to the top of the tree. So it's not an ideal situation, but if you don't have a fence there, they grow well. And okay, let's talk about summer pruning for a minute. When you've got, here's an apple tree with a whole bunch of shoots coming out, sucker shoots. You can leave it like that, and then at the end, when you prune the next year, you can take out what you want and leave what you want. Or you can cut it all out right now in the summertime, or you can cut most of it out and then cut back on some of the limbs to leave fruit, to force some fruiting spurs. And that's typically what you'll do is if you run a summer prune, you'll cut it back to like 2 or 3 nodes, and so you can see they've taken everything off except this one limb, and then he's coming back to cut it off at about 2 nodes. So it'll force spurs down on those lower nodes instead of more sucker growth. You'll still get sucker growth a lot of times, but if you just, the next year maybe you come back and just cut it off one node higher. And as you keep doing that, eventually it'll force those spurs, fruiting spurs to form.
So this is kind of a training method to teach the tree where to do its work somewhere else, instead of making more branch.
Yeah, yeah, it's a way to try to force it into fruiting instead of into vegetated growth. And again, like I say, you can do it when you prune in the spring, the same thing. You can just cut it off to 2 or 3 nodes, and that's typically what I'll do on a lot of it. If there isn't a lot of fruiting nodes, branches, I'll just cut those off to 2 or 3 nodes. Okay, any other questions on fruit trees, or we'll talk about raspberries for a minute. Raspberries and grapes. There's 2 kinds of raspberries. There's the fall raspberries, and then there's the everbearing varieties. And the old style were all fall bearing, and some of the newer varieties though are what they call everbearing. And there's a different way to prune them. You don't want to prune them the same. So for fall bearing raspberries, you want to remove all the dead growth from the previous year. So I've already taken out all the dead stuff here, but the raspberry shoots that were up there that fruited last year all die off. You know, they're dead. You can see them. They're easy to prune because they're dead. You can tell they're dead. And then you just leave the ones that are what they call primicanes and floricanes. These were the primicanes last year. Now they will be the floricanes this year. They'll have the flowers on them.
So how high is that? Is that a tall variety?
Well, they're probably about 4 to 5 feet. Oops, 4 to 5 feet.
Okay. And this is a fall bearing.
This is these are candies. These are fall bearing, and so after you prune out, after you get rid of all the dead stuff, then you thin out all the weak canes. So if you got little thin ones that aren't going to stand up by themselves, then I cut all those out. And then finally, top them off at about 4 to 5 feet, depending on what your preference is and where they're located. A lot of people will trellis raspberries, put a stake in and to try to keep them from falling over. But if you prune them correctly and they're growing good strong canes, they'll pretty much stand up by themselves. You don't need to. I've never trellised my raspberries.
How much trouble do you have them growing into the lawn?
A lot of trouble. So what I did is I dug along the edge here and I put down sheet metal about 10 inches.
You can't go.
I was gonna joke a couple of feet.
Yeah.
10 inches is good.
Probably about 12 inches is good, but I just laid sheet metal all the way along the edge there so that they won't come out in the lawn. But otherwise, yeah, you'll be mowing them all summer.
Do that with roses too.
Yeah. Okay, and then finally, you want to thin the canes to 4 to 6 canes per hill. Now I haven't thinned these yet. So I would go in and I'd probably take some of these out to thin them down a little bit so that they.
So how far apart are the hills?
Well, usually they're about 3 feet apart. So you usually have about 4 to 6 canes here, and then 3 feet here. You got another 4 to 6 feet canes. When you plant them, that's about how you plant them. About 3 feet apart plants, and so. I mean, they just kind of grow together after a while. So you just kind of thin them out to what you think.
Is that for nutrition, water? What is that for?
Yeah,
just air?
well, the root system is only so big, and so if you limit the number of canes, they'll get bigger and more fruit on them than if you have a whole bunch of little ones.
Maybe that's what
Get big, larger raspberries and
Do you prefer the candies?
part.
You
Well,
prefer the candies?
yes and no. For me, they're the best tasting raspberry you can grow, but they're susceptible to viruses, and I've lost several raspberry patches because of the virus. So
And what if that happens? Do you move into a new zone?
you have to move to another area. Yeah. I mean, over the years it'll heal, but it takes several years.
2 lifetimes, huh?
Yeah.
What about those lawnmower raspberries?
What about
What do you know about those?
That's this one right here. The everbearing types are the lawnmower variety. If you wanna use the lawnmower. So the everbearing will produce 2 crops if you prune them correctly, or well, not correctly, but if you prune them to force 2 crops. So when they grow, the fall crop. For a fall crop only, you cut all the great canes off right at ground level. That's the lawnmower method. So you can actually take your lawnmower and just cut them all off. If you don't like your lawnmower. But, and then, they will, in the spring, they'll grow up and you'll get a fall crop of raspberries, okay? You won't get a spring crop, it's just a fall crop. And, but if you want the everbearing type, what you do is, in the fall, you just cut off the dead portion of the cane. The cane will fruit only about the top, from the top down. And so, probably at the end of the year, you'll have a dead cane on top, and then they'll still be green on the bottom. So you want to cut the dead part off. And if you go through all your patch and cut the dead part off, then the next year, the spring crop will come on those lower canes, on the lower portion of those canes that you left, and then they'll die. And in the meantime, you'll have new ones coming up that will give you a fall crop. Okay? And so they call them everbearing, but it's really a spring crop or a
And
summer
as
and
far
a
as
fall.
production and weight of product, how different are they?
You know, I haven't had that much experience to know. My neighbor has some, and they get a pretty good crop. I would say they're probably comparable,
Maybe it doesn't tell you off to put them on the freezer.
but you have to pick them a lot longer. I kind of prefer the spring crop, the summer crop, because you get one big crop and then you're through with them and you don't have to worry about them. Okay, grapes. This is typically the way that you will grow a grapevine. It will, you'll have a main trunk, and then you'll have like 4 main branches going off from the trunk. And when you prune them in the fall, you prune them back so they look kind of like that. And here's another, this one just has a single. A lot of commercial growers will just do a single branch like that. And you can see when you prune them, you prune off just about everything except the small spurs that you want for the next year's growth. And if you actually, when you see a vineyard that's been pruned, you really can't see those spurs. They just look just like the branch is bare. But when you prune it, you want to make sure you don't prune it right flush with the main branch, because there's some little buds right there, and you want to make sure you leave those buds, or leave 1 or 2 nodes on some of those branches that you prune off, so that you'll make sure you have growth the following year.
So cutting them off this way is wrong.
Right. Leave a little bit there. Now, like I have some that go over our pergola, and you can see at the end of the year they get pretty pretty ratty. They're just, I mean, they're everywhere.
As a community service, can you help that Mexican restaurant down there?
All
their
advertise
water,
it,
it's
it's full.
And so, you know, I just, you know, basically prune everything off except a few, and these probably have more than you'd normally leave, but until they get a little bit bigger, I leave a few extra branches just to give you some grapes.
So is that ladder for the purpose of pruning?
Well, yeah, because I get up on top of the pergola, because they go up and then across,
So are they shade? and
so that,
pruning
yeah, it provides shade all
all
summer.
summer?
And then you just pick the grapes through the. Any questions? I think that's,
Yeah, why can't we buy grape plants in Idaho anymore? Because of the wineries?
no, yeah, probably, yeah, because they're afraid of diseases coming in with the grapes, and so they
You
forget.
can't have home-grown grapes anymore?
You can't buy them.
You can't buy
a
them.
grape plant
You
to
can
sell
have them,
grapes.
but you can't buy them. They don't sell them in
Yeah,
Idaho.
you have to order them, or you have to tell them.
So you either have to go to Logan and buy them, or you can propagate grapes very easily. Just cut some of the when you prune them in the fall, just take some of those and stick them in some, or in the spring, I mean, stick them in some dirt, keep them wet, and they'll grow.
But if you want a different variety.
If you want a different variety, you have to go somewhere. and
What
buy
are
it.
some varieties that work well here?
Well, the interlaken grows very well.
Don't it
here.
depend on where you plant them? Like I planted Concord and people said, you'll never grow them. I can't quit the things from growing.
Yeah, I planted Concord and it hasn't worked very well, but we had some neighbors that had Concords and boy, they grew great. Yeah, they will if you get them in the right spot.
Is it
Yeah, mine's
soil?
kind of sheltered. It's kind of sheltered. It's plenty of sunshine. It's got it's up against the shed and then it's gonna hit us.
I wanna get that gutted.
I have one question about your raspberries.
Yes.
Your evergreen growth,
Uh-huh.
you cut off the first part, and then they're gonna send the next shoot up. What's the pruning
on that class.
in the middle of the year, or at the
I'm the
end of the
teacher,
year,
right?
when you've got two cans,
Yep.
one
And
halfway
that's
from
my
last
recipe,
year,
so
and the new
we
shoot?
might be in
So
trouble.
you don't prune the new canes.
I'll put it
Just
up.
leave